Good afternoon. My name is Laura James. I have a master's in public health and I'm working on a master's in criminal justice and criminology. Today I'm going to be briefing you all on the increasing threat that Mexican human traffickers have to the U.S. and their threat against homeland security. The number of human traffickers and victims have steadily been increasing over the years. Throughout this increase, Mexico has been a country of top interest as a source of traffickers and of victims. Traffickers are an immense threat to their victims and the public through their trafficking activities and other criminal activities that they're often involved in. In regards to harm inflicted on victims of trafficking, they're often abused by their traffickers, which can lead to mental and emotional disorders. To help curb this problem of trafficking, enhanced border security, increased training of law enforcement agents, and improved education of them and the public can be utilized. This will also help improve the estimates of the number of traffickers and of victims. Thus, Mexican human traffickers should remain a focus because they pose a threat to homeland security, Americans, and their victims. So unfortunately, the number of traffickers and victims is growing around the globe. It is now the second largest criminal industry in the world. From 2015 to 2016 in the US, the number of trafficking victims increased by 35%, which equaled over 8,000 reports of human trafficking in the US for 2016. The US remains one of the top destinations for traffickers, and many Mexican traffickers continue to come to this country. Many traffickers also continue to traffic for years because it is lucrative and constantly lucrative too, and they're often not caught, and very few are convicted. We are highly confident that the problem will continue to grow since there is a constant and increasing demand for trafficking victims, and trafficking is profitable. Profits are estimated to be $150 billion around the globe annually. So why is Mexico a focus? Mexico continues to be a major source for human traffickers. These traffickers are often undetected or are not flagged as traffickers, and then they often remain in the U.S. to continue trafficking. This trafficking flow is of immense concern to national security, especially in the southwest and west coast of the U.S. So enhancing border control, focusing on top destinations for trafficking could help curb the problem of traffickers entering the country and then detecting them once they are here. So Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Diego would be three cities that would be worth focusing on more since they have the highest number of child sex trafficking of U.S. cities. So to increase focus on specific Mexican traffickers could also be another prong of an approach to help decrease the trafficking problem. So now going into threats that traffickers pose to this country and its citizens. Traffickers are frequently involved in other illegal activities and are highly dangerous individuals. Many traffickers also smuggle illicit arms or drugs into the U.S., and they often use similar methods and routes that terrorists and other criminals utilize. They are a constant threat to their victims, obviously, while also posing a threat to anyone that they may encounter. So now to focus on the victims. Many Mexican human trafficking victims experience frequent abuse and manipulations at the hands of their captor, which often leads to long-lasting trauma for those victims. Last year, 359 Mexican human trafficking victims were identified. They're the second largest group of victims in the U.S., and this is only beside or after American victims. And then overall, a third of victims as a whole in the U.S. were Latino and Latina, which is a huge percentage. So of these victims identified last year, about 15% of them were forced labor victims, and then over 3/4 were sex trafficked victims, and then 4% were both labor and sex trafficking victims. Also, many victims suffer from PTSD, drug addiction, sexually transmitted infections, suicidal thoughts, depression, and anxiety. So in regards to the size of the human trafficking problem, it is probably much larger than we even estimate, but steps can be made to increase the accuracy of the scope of this problem. There are a variety of reasons for the difficulties in assessing this scope. So in regard to like the roles of victims in making it hard to determine how large this problem is, many victims fall through the cracks. Many victims, their voices are silenced or pushed aside. And then also other victims never come forward. This may be due to they not speaking English, they're afraid of authorities, or they may not even consider themselves victims, or they're deported back to Mexico before they can become involved in the criminal justice system. So these are some of the contributing factors for the underestimates of the number of victims. And then regards to the traffickers' role with these difficulties with estimating, just traffickers can look very different. So they may have a fake front to their trafficking business, such as a like massage parlor, or they may be like more off the scenes and their victims look like prostitutes on the streets. They also may be highly organized or hardly organized at all. They may have a big web in their criminal network, or be very small and kind of be on their own and just, you know, with their victims. They also may pose as a boyfriend or an uncle to their victim. So these differences help contribute to some traffickers not being identified, as well as the victims not being identified, which then makes it hard to fully assess the scope of this problem. However, with increasing education on how to identify traffickers and their victims could help with this issue, as well as informing the public on what trafficking entails, and then who you should inform, like if you think you have, you know, witnessed a trafficking incident, or have been around a trafficker, or have found like a victim. So with this assessment of Mexican human trafficking problem, there are alternative assessments as well. So with the difficulty of the reliability of the data on this issue, and since it's difficult to determine, Mexico may not be one of the biggest problems that the US should be concerned about in regards to trafficking, or actually maybe a bigger problem. And then some other alternatives is the problem is actually not growing, but increased awareness of the problem is growing, which makes, you know, increases inflated numbers. Or maybe the problem is even growing more than we think, and so it should even be a high-end problem. So nonetheless, even with these shortcomings of like the data and potential alternative assessments, human trafficking is still a problem. And because the U.S. shares borders with Mexico, Mexico will continue to be a concern and an area of focus for examining the human trafficking problem. So in summary, human trafficking continues to be an issue in the U.S. and is a problem that is increasing. Mexico also continues to be a concern due to the number of human traffickers that come into the U.S. and pose a threat to our country's national security. They also pose a threat through harming victims and the public. So focusing on border control, law enforcement agents, and the public can help improve those estimates of trafficking and help curb this human trafficking problem that plagues these countries. Are there any questions? Thank you.